Hello everyone, Para here from the Paradox Brothers channel. Today I'm going to be doing a review over the most recent PWCQ, I believe it was 39, and it was a 52 player tournament and happened just this last month, in June. So uh, but let's go through it. We'll talk about some of the trends and some of the choices that players made and what might have benefited and what worked, what didn't work from what I could tell. Um, so just to begin with, the winner of the tournament was, I believe this, I don't know if they pronounce the name Payday or Paid, or I'm not entirely sure. So if you know how they pronounce the name, let me know down below. Um, but they played a Reasoning Gate Turbo strategy, one of the first successful Reasoning Gate Turbo decks that we've seen in quite some time. I think the majority of people will run into this deck on the ladder and might lose a game or so, but in a tournament, it's very difficult to win with this deck because it is fairly easy to counter. Now, that being said, when we look at these side decks here, you'll see that most people weren't ready for it because this is just it's not a deck that's been used very often, not recently. I think a lot of the lack of success for players using this deck is not playing it as a combo deck or like a OTK finishing deck, versus they kind of play it more like some people try to make variants where they can grind out, and in general in GOAT format and a lot of things in life really in all sorts of games, when you have a strategy that you're going for, you really want to focus on that strategy and kind of perfect it versus kind of going too many different directions. When you try to make a kind of a utilitarian type of deck where it has an answer to a lot of different things, you end up losing the general focus of kind of what the deck was all about and end up making it just overall generally worse. And I think in some of the decks you'll see here, not that any of them were particularly bad, but I think a lot of them were trying new things that maybe dampened the original strategy of the deck. And but this player played very well, played the Reasoning Gate Turbo deck like it should be played, as like a collecting all your combo pieces, utilizing your life points as kind of a resource of sorts to just allow yourself to take a certain amount of damage. You don't have to set cards all the time. You don't have to set bluffs, especially at the beginning of the game. And you can just take damage until you draw into a piece of your combo that you really need to start going into it. Because the hope is that you make an overwhelming board if you OTK them. It's possible you may not, but if played correctly, you can certainly do that. But running through this deck real fast, some things I'll point out are, like, for example, they use only 2 Chaos Sorcerer versus the 3, making a total monster lineup of only 8, which I actually think the ratio of monsters in GOAT format decks is very important. In Chaos Turbo, you see about 20 or so, Warrior, you see about 14 to 15. GOAT Control, I feel like hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the most recent time at least. But I feel like 15 to 17 is a good number for that. And Reasoning Gate, I feel like 8 is a good number. 8 to 10, probably less than 10 if you can. You really don't, you only need as many monsters as, and this is where I think people mess up on building the Reasoning Gate decks, but you only need as many monsters as you require to actually perform the OTK. Unlike Rescue Cat and decks like that, you don't have to, you can make this work with a lot less pieces. Because you have the Reasoning, the Monster Gate, and Scapegoats, Chaos Monsters, the Premature, to bring back the Dark Magician of Chaos, etc. So you have lots of different avenues to take in order to achieve the same goal. So 2 Chaos Monsters, or 3 Chaos Monsters in total, 2 Chaos Sorcerer makes a lot of sense to me, because you have Dark Magician of Chaos, which in a lot of cases ends up being better. Jinzo, which shuts off the traps for the OTK, 2 Sacred Crane, just draw your deck, and a Toon Cannon Soldier, because they do run the Toon table of contents, kind of thinning out the deck engine, which makes sense. Once again, a cohesive strategy that all lends itself to the same idea. Drawing cards with Draw Greed, thinning out the deck with Toon table of contents, drawing more cards with Upstart Goblin, etc. So congratulations to this player. I think they played very well. I'm not going to go through every single card of every single deck. I'm just going to kind of go over the general overview. Um, but overall, I think this deck is very difficult to play really well, but very, very good when played well. And in their side deck, you can see they also lend themselves to the same strategy. They didn't really side in anything for a grind game really outside of the Swords of Revealing Light. They have the spell cancelers for the matchup against this deck, like the Ditto matchup. World Decrees just to show off traps because they don't have any traps. Most of the time they probably don't even need the World Decree unless it's like, you know, burn or something like that, because Giant True Nade, when you're ready to go in, you just Giant True Nade. Yeah, so if you're looking against, by the way, how to side against Reasoning, I would definitely look at the side deck of the Reasoning Gate player, because they actually had a lot of, now keep in mind the Threatening Roar, they probably put in even against aggressive decks because they don't really, you know, they don't really have any battle traps. They don't want battle traps, they want reactable traps, so makes a lot of sense. And I also think the Token Thanksgiving is very good against burn strategies as well, so does the opposite of what the burn player wants you to do. Moving on, the second place was a Chaos Turbo, I guess just a standard Chaos Turbo deck, really. Nothing really out of the ordinary. This player just plays this deck very well and performs very well. The things to note, the current trends of Chaos Turbo seems to be that they're gearing their deck more to beat the Chaos Turbo decks themselves. So you're going to see Mind Control a lot more, Trap Dust Shoots a lot more, things of that nature. So, which, you know, Goat Control decks and Warrior decks can and will take advantage of, because, you know, Mind Control is not as good, especially against Warrior. So, third place, played a Warrior deck. I believe this player is known for playing a different sort of deck, a Zoo Return strategy, but they didn't do that here. They just play a very standard Warrior that maybe had a little bit more of a emphasis on defeating Chaos Turbo, particularly in the main deck, because the two Mystic Swordsman versus maybe the one. And once again, you see a strategy, or you see a ratio of like 14 monsters here. So that way it affords them to put other things in the deck. The two Upstart Goblins, I'm sure, you know, it's not necessarily wrong to put that in Warrior, but I do think, you know, Warrior decks aren't really meant for the long grind game. They want to take focus early on, take control early on, and maintain that momentum. I think Upstarts are fine to put in here if you wanted to, but I personally, after trying it in Warrior decks, unless you have a specific sort of niche Warrior strategy that diverges from the normal Warrior strategy, I don't know if Upstart Goblin makes the most sense. Obviously, it worked well for this player because they placed third. So, but yeah, good deck. In the side deck, it's important to know, I guess, they had 3 Magician of Faith, so they definitely were siding into some sort of you know, flip strategy with the Magician of Faith and the Gravekeeper Spy and the Mobiuses. Fourth place is this is kind of one of the more difficult decks to really decide what it actually is. It has a lot of different things that's, you know, kind of going on here. So you have the 2 Monarchs, you have the flip monsters, and you have some Warriors. Ultimately, I decided to classify this kind of as a Warrior deck, a Warrior flip kind of hybrid, but I don't really know if that's truly what you should classify it as, so I guess that's just a disclaimer, because I will give a chart at the end of this video of kind of the breakdown of what the top 8 looked like as far as percentage-wise. But yeah, and one thing you'll see is a lot of these decks use Trap Dust Shoot. Still using Trap Dust Shoot, have been using it for the last few big tournaments, and still using it. But yeah, very interesting. Moving on to 5th place. 5th place is another Warrior. Once again, you know, 15 monsters for the ratio of monsters in the deck. This is a more kind of, I guess, like a standard Warrior deck you might see nowadays. The one Tsukiyomi definitely is interesting though, because I'm sure that would help against the Warrior matchup. Probably doesn't do anything against Chaos Turbo matchups, which maybe kind of diverges a little bit from what the main focus of this deck is right now, with the Spies and the Magician of Faith. You know, this flip Warrior package is becoming more normal, although, I mean, obviously it still works, but I kind of wonder if this maybe diverges a little too much. Maybe one Magician of Faith in here works really well, but when you start putting in everything else, especially in the main deck, you're kind of like, for example, Gatekeeper Spy doesn't do anything against Chaos Turbo, and the initial thought of this deck was to beat Chaos Turbo, which is why a lot of people play it. So it kind of makes me wonder if you really should just not regulate, this to the side deck instead, and then put something else in. But it's obviously worked well for this player. But those are just my thoughts on things like that. Sixth place is a Chaos Control deck. I guess this is what we would call this. They have the Scapegoats, the Metamorphosis, the 2 Chaos Sorcerers. This is probably a deck you don't see very often anymore, but I think Goat Control, Chaos Control definitely has a potential to do really, really well in today's meta, because people just aren't expecting it. You don't see too many. You do see, like, this player had Book of Moon, but a lot of people, for some reason, have Book of Moon in their main deck, so I'm sure that actually hurt this player quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, the top, so 3 out of the top 4 had Book of Moon in their main deck. 4 out of the top, yeah. So most people had Book of Moon in their deck, and some of them had 2 additional ones in their side deck. So I'm sure that hurt this quite a bit. But I do still think there's a lot of room for this to do well. Let's see, 7th place is I just call this a Chaos Turbo. It's really just a Chaos Turbo with some 1 or 2 different cards than what the normal build might have. Instead of another Chaos Sorcerer, they have a Zaborg, which is kind of cool. Instead of they have 1 Mystic Tomato, which is probably just get the Sandgan, the Spirit Reaper, the Korchi, the Spy. They can get a lot of different things. I mean, if someone destroys it makes it. Mystic Tomato is definitely strong against Blade Knight, for example, because it allows you to special, out Spirit Reaper if you need a stall, or Great Reaper Spy if you need a stall, or something like that. So I see the purpose behind putting one of those in. Yeah, they definitely have some battle. Like I said, I think with the monsters and the traps, this makes me think they really were kind of, instead of what a lot of turbo decks are kind of gearing up to beat turbo, this is kind of gearing up to beat warrior, which I totally understand. But at the same time, I think turbo decks and their general main focus is just to kind of play their own game, play kind of almost like a combo game, not really paying much attention. Maybe having battle traps in the main deck didn't help as much as it could have, maybe for some of the other turbo players. But maybe having them in the main or the side deck instead of the main deck would have made more sense in this case. Maybe instead of 2 Sakratsu Armors, having 3 Trapdoor Shoots, maybe having some Jar Greed, something like that. But I mean, obviously, anyone in the top 8 played really well. So, and for the 8th place, it's just this is a Mask of Darkness kind of chaos deck. So it takes a lot of the things you might see in a Chaos Turbo deck, with the Thunder Dragons, the Spies, the Magician of Face, but not to say that's the Korchis, but instead of what would they normally use? I guess instead of, like in this case, using a Spirit Reaper and a Mystic Tomato, they used 2 Mask of Darkness, and they also have 2 Tsukiyomi in here, probably to kind of recycle the Mask of Darkness. The general synergy, I think, was they have Reckless Greed, which is another interesting card, and they just would play Reckless Greed, try to recycle it. It's like a Pot of Greed that maybe if they have like kind of a soft lock going on with the Solemns, they could probably recycle it multiple times, consecutive turns, if it works correctly. Of course, it's all very dependent, and Reckless Greed could be a really not great card if you're in a bad situation. So it's like it's an interesting high risk, high reward type of situation if they could recycle this or not. If they find themselves not being able to, I mean, Reckless Greed doesn't really fit super well. I mean, it does in a sense. You draw more cards, and you think initially that would make perfect sense, but also you can't draw for 2 turns. So unless you can recycle it or find another way to draw in that time. But I like the idea a lot, so it'd be interesting to see if this player like pushes this or abandons it entirely. But the Mask of Darkness builds, I think, are really good, and very fun for for a deck that is kind of really played, maybe even overplayed, having a different version of it is very neat. And they have the one magic cylinder in here, which is just cool. I like to see that card. So obviously they have lots of battle traps in their side decks because they probably side out, the Reckless Greed, the magic cylinder, maybe against warriors. They really don't want to be, or probably no more across it, I guess, right? Then they have the Zombira for the warrior matchup as well. No reinforcements to the army, but I guess just having it in there just makes them, obviously you have two, they're pretty likely to draw it. So down here, I made a little chart here of, obviously there's only 8 decks, so it's not like super expansive or anything. But, there was only one Chaos Control, one Beast Negate, so that made up 12.5% of the decks in top 8. And then the Chaos Warrior and Chaos Turbo both had 3 each. Remember, I was considering the flip hybrid warriors to be more warrior related than more Chaos Turbo related, or Chaos another variant. I could just make a general, like if I made just one section of the pie that was just Chaos, it would be like 85% of the decks would be that exactly. So you had to draw a line at some point. But yeah, Chaos Warriors were 37.5, and so was Chaos Turbo, which is kind of what you would expect based on the fact that both of those decks are fairly easy to get into and fairly easy to have success with, which encourages people to want to play them. Versus Reasoning Gate, not only does Reasoning Gate not have a high success rate, it also has a lot of people who strongly dislike playing against that deck, which maybe dissuades people from wanting to try it. But don't let that be a factor. You should play whatever decks you want to play. There was no burn in the top 8 at all, which once again, if you look actually at the top 8 side decks, a lot of them. So let's just go through it. So King Tiger is probably the biggest problem for cat burn decks, which I believe cat burn decks are the best type of burn decks. But yeah, King Tiger is just a nightmare for that deck. But you can look here, no King Tiger in that one, none in that one. And Mystic Walk doesn't really matter as much against Rescue Cat as it does your traditional burn. And all these people are just putting in Mystic Walks for their burn. They think that Mystic Walk just solves that. Now this person does have the this person is actually pretty well prepared for any kind of burn, really. They have the Amazoness Archer, the 2 King Tigers, and the 1 Mystic Walk, so that could be rough. No King Tiger in this one, no King Tiger in this one, none in here. The Mystic Walks are in there, and none in there. So of all the top 8, there's only one deck that has King Tiger in there that's really well prepared for the burn strategy, or even goat control strategy for that matter. So, and that could have been part of the reason why the Scapegoats did well in the Reasoning Gate deck, is because very few people had King Tigers in their side. So if people are still not going to keep siding in King Tiger, especially in Warriors, which makes no sense to me, then I would suggest, that suggests to me that there's a good opportunity for people to start playing goat control decks, chaos controls with goats, and burn decks that use Ojama tokens and things like that. And Rescue Cat, of course, Rescue Cat burn, which is my favorite type of burn deck. So I think, there's a wide opportunity for that sort of thing. But why don't you guys let us know down below, and hopefully you like these types of videos. We're always trying to kind of improve them within reason. We'll see you in the next one. Once there's the next big tournament, we'll probably once again kind of do a little review like this and see where everything kind of is. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye.